One morning, I woke up to go to work and the soles of my feet were all tingling. Only this particular morning, the blood didn't rush back. Sat in the neurologist's office. Within literally 5 minutes, she said, I'm 99% certain that you have multiple sclerosis. And if I'm right, there's nothing you can do.
いうことで、その日に私は退院が決まりました。で、私はホスピスの代わりに自宅に戻っただけです。私のがんを愛してやったの。痛みが消えたんです。鎮痛剤なくて痛みが消えたんです。
We can't just outsource our health to doctors. It's both scary and empowering because it's up to us.
Radical Remission survivor of stage 4 melanoma,
breast cancer,
pancreatic cancer,
ovarian cancer,
chronic lymphocytic leukemia,
chronic fatigue syndrome,
ALS,
non-small cell lung cancer,
survivor of multiple myeloma cancer.
I lost a very close friend of mine to cancer when we were both 16. And that's why after I graduated from Harvard, I went back and got my master's in counseling at UC Berkeley because I wanted to help cancer patients. So I was counseling cancer patients and life was great. And then I came across one of these cases of radical remission. A radical remission is a statistically unlikely remission. So that could mean a remission that happens without any conventional medicine. It could mean a remission that happens with conventional medicine, but then that medicine doesn't work, so people have to turn to other options. Or it could mean someone who overcomes a very dire prognosis, combining both conventional and alternative methods at the same time. And what I mean by dire is anything with a less than 25% 5-year survival rate. So really anyone who's beating the odds, statistically, is considered a radical remission. I came across one of these cases, and everything just stopped for me, and I said, how do I not know this man's name? How come we all don't know? This man found a cure for his cancer. How come I haven't heard about him? And that night I went home and I found on PubMed that there were over 1,000 of these radical remission cases published in medical journals, and no one was looking at them. So I said, we can't just keep ignoring these cases. Even if we can't explain why these people got well, as researchers, as scientists, that doesn't mean we can ignore them. So I went back for my PhD at UC Berkeley, and I said, I want to study these 1,000 cases that no one else is studying. So I've been studying radical remission survivors for 15 years now. I've analyzed over 1,500 cases from 10 different countries. And what I've found is that there are some common threads to what they are doing to get well. In fact, there are 10 common threads.
And in this 10-episode docuseries, we'll be covering one healing factor per episode.
Many people do more than these 10 things, but when I look at what are they all doing, they're all doing these 10 things. So it all started there, and it probably would have ended there had I not come across the case of Shin Terayama.
東京で1936年の1月に生まれました。音楽が大好きでした。特に生まれたばかりの時に父が私のことを抱いてくれて、そしてパブロ・カサルスのチェロをたくさん聴かせてくれた。正式に習い始めたのは20歳の時です。それはただただ神の国の音楽だ、そのように聞こえていた。それは日本での最高のチェリストに私は出会った。彼はアマチュアとかプロを区別しないで教えるけどいいかと。で、私はそれを約束させられて、それはチェロの練習がどれだけ素晴らしいかと。そういうことでチェロの練習には1日3時間から5時間、ある時は8時間かけてました。電気工学科の授業というのはほとんど私の知ってることばかりだったんで、これは勉強しなくて済んだんです。早稲田大学でもって電気工学科という当時一番競争率の激しいところをパスしました。
I was born in Santa Monica, California, and as a kid, I was happy. I was happy most of the time, and I also think that I had a current of anxiety running through me most of my memory. I was adopted as a baby, and my birth mother was only 14 years old, so I think I developed anxiety, maybe even in utero. And my adoptive father was a fighter pilot, and he and I butted heads quite a bit, and he was a yeller, and he was very opinionated and judgmental. So I think I struggled with feelings of safety from really early on.
So after college, did you go right to graduate school? Or was
No, at the same time.
at the same time?
Same time.
College and graduate school
Yes.
at the same time?
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible, Shin.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
You're very smart.
Oh, not smart. I was so much curious. まず大学を出てから都立大学というのが私の自宅のすぐ近くにあったんで、そこの夜学に2年間聴講生で通いました。そこでもって学んだのが物理だったんです。28歳です。結婚してすぐにできちゃいました。電機メーカー東芝という会社に入って半導体の素子の開発試作をやりました。東芝には13年おりました。
I've always been a good student. I loved school. I always worked hard and I played hard. And I was really pushed by my parents. So I found early on in life that the way to get more love was to work harder and bring home good grades. So that's what I did throughout all of my schooling. So in high school, I got good grades. I was student body secretary treasurer. And I knew early on that I wanted to go to a good college, and that was something that my parents really encouraged. So there was a lot of pressure at home, I would say, to study and encouragement to get into a good school. So I really made it an effort. The hard work of high school did pay off. I applied early decision to Middlebury College in Vermont and got in, and I just had no doubt in my mind that that's where I wanted to go to school. So that's where I went.
1972年に私が東芝を辞めて、そしてアメリカに1975年に初めてナショナルコンピューターカンファレンスというところにコンピューターの導入をうまく助けるコンサルタントを始めた。じゃあ朝の9時から12時までの間に会社に来てもらって社員の教育をしてほしいと。自宅にはほとんど帰れませんでした。会社にスリーピングバッグを置いてその中で寝てました。私はその朝翌日のまた他の会社の指導をやるために全部その資料を整えてコピーで取って、そして社長の教育をやるために午前2時ぐらいまで働いてて、それで数時間寝ただけです。それは47歳になったばかりの2月の朝、たくさんの出血をしました。おしっこが真っ赤になってました。血液検査をやっても何の異常がなかった。ですから私は医者から見たら全然ただ疲れているということだけをいろいろ検査しても何も見つからなかった。まず血尿が1回出て何もその後起こらなかった。でちょうど次やったら28日目だった。そしてまた同じように28日目にそれが血尿が出たんです。そしたら内科の先生がちょっと横になってください。初めて医者が患者の体を触ることをやったんです。これは私はびっくりしました。それまで血液検査だけでもってあとは何の異常も発見しないと言って3分でもって終わるのは私がその日の一番最後の患者さんだったんで初めて手で触ってくる。そしたらその腎臓の右の腎臓のところがうんと腫れてるっていうのが手でよく分かったんで、それで早速泌尿器の医者を呼んで それで超音波でもって見てみたら大きく腫れてると。で泌尿器の先生は直ちにこれはもっと詳細な検査が必要かと思ったので、とうとう彼は私のことをまた来てほしいって言うんですけど、私には時間がなかったんです。時間がなかったんで、その代わりに私は6ヶ月間ほっぽったんです。
Health events like autoimmune or cancer, you should be able to see some emergence of problems before the actual onset of symptoms, but I didn't. It just hit me when I was 19. So there was nothing in my freshman year of college that would indicate that something was coming. I was home from the summer after my freshman year of college, working a summer job, happy-go-lucky, work hard, play hard kind of young woman. And one morning I woke up to go to work and the soles of my feet were all tingling, like that feeling that you've sat on a limb for too long and when the blood rushes back, it gets all tingling. You know that feeling? Only this particular morning, the blood didn't rush back and I shook my feet, nothing would happen. So I thought, oh, it'll just go away. I went off to work. I was hostessing at a restaurant. And the tingling just started creeping up my legs like a vine. And by mid-morning, the tingling had reached my knees, and that's when I knew something was really wrong. So I called my parents, who called the family doctor, who said, get her over to the neurologist at UCLA today. So that's what they did. They picked me up, and off we went to the neurologist's office.
右側の部分だけを何か取ってほしいって言ったのに全部取ってしまいました。病理検査にもそれを持っていったところ、何か悪いものがあるって医者は何も言わないんですって。ただ私の妻に何かがあると言ったぐらいで、それで私に言ったのは直ちにこれは注射をしてそれが広がらないようにしなきゃいけないと言って抗がん剤の注射を始めたんです。それがシスプラチンという当時最強の抗がん剤だった。で私はそれを受けました。まず医者のことを本当に信じていました。それをやらないと大変だ。でなんでそんなことをやるのかと医者は何も言ってくれなかった。でその時に何を私が思ったのかって、何かが悪いことが入ったんだろうと思ったんだ。
We sat in the neurologist's office for I think 5 or 6 minutes total. And she had me do a real cursory exam of walking across her floor, heel toe, and touching my fingers to my nose. And within literally 5 minutes, she said, I'm 99% certain that you have multiple sclerosis, MS. And if I'm right, there's nothing you can do. The neurologist said the only way that we can tell for sure whether or not this is MS is to do an NMR, which stands for Nuclear Magnetic Resonance Image, which is a super scary precursor name to the MRI. And there was only one in the area in Pasadena, so we needed to wait. So that is in fact how it was ultimately diagnosed as MS. So it was only later that I found out that the neurologist had pulled my parents aside after the appointment was over and told them that they needed to get ready for me to spend my life in a wheelchair because that's where I was probably headed. So I think we were all shell-shocked because we had never heard of this disease. And when we left, I think we left and got in the car really in stunned silence because we couldn't make heads or tails. It just didn't make any sense to go from being a formerly athletic, happy, healthy young woman to completely flattened by a diagnosis and not knowing what to expect. And I can only imagine what my parents were thinking, having been told, get ready for the wheelchair because that's what's coming. So all I knew was we needed to go home and wait this out. And if I wanted to take steroids, which was a way to help with the major inflammation, that was one potential option, but I didn't choose that path. By the time we left the neurologist's office, the tingling had crept up to right underneath my collarbone. My entire body was tingling, with the exception of my arms, so really everything from the neck down. What I do remember from that night was crawling in bed, and my mom crawled in with me. And by this time, she's holding me and she's crying. And at this point, I think I'm crying even harder because I can't feel anything from the neck down. It was confusing, terrifying, had no idea how long the numbness would last. No idea. So that night, it was just tears and fear. Yeah, just loss of hope.
抗がん剤を3クールやるといったことを1クール目の月曜日から水曜日は何の副作用もなかった。で4日目に初めて全てを吐いてしまった。これはひどいなって言うんで、この注射やめてくださいって言ったら医者と口論してしまったんです。医者は3クールやらないと効かないよと、効かなかったら僕の責任じゃないよというような態度を取り始めた。それが医者との初めての医者を信頼できないなという感じだった。
I was numb from the neck down for a full 6 weeks. It was an awful time. And now I could still walk because I had musculature. I still had my muscles, but I couldn't feel anything. So if you had pinched me, if I had stubbed my toe, I couldn't even feel when I went to the bathroom. I mean, it was just this, it was like being wrapped in cotton. And every morning, my dad would help me walk into the living room because we had a couch, and I would lie on the couch all day. A really uplifting part of that summer was having friends come by and bring, what do friends bring at 19, cookies and books. And this one friend brought me a book. It was Norman Cousins' Anatomy of an Illness. He's a man who himself had some mysterious autoimmune condition. And in part, he helped cure himself with laughter and high doses of vitamin C. So that laughter part made a ton of sense. So my family and I made it a priority to watch funny things on TV. And another thing that I started doing that I didn't have any book or there wasn't any guidance about this, but I started doing guided visualizations. And this just came to me kind of naturally. And if you remember back in time Pac-Man as a video game that kids play, where the little Pac-Man character starts eating the bad guys, right? I started viewing somehow or other my immune system as eating whatever bad guys are attacking me. I didn't put it together what was actually happening, but I conjured up these images of good versus evil and started to just do these visualizations occasionally as I lay on the couch. The most important thing that happened to me that summer is a family friend who came and she brought a gift, but I didn't recognize it as a gift at all at the time because she asked me a question. She said, "Palmer, why do you think you got the MS?" And I was stunned. It made me really angry. What do you mean, why do I think I got the MS? Do you think I caused this? Wait a minute, did I bring this on? And so she left, and the question wouldn't leave me. So I just chewed on that question like a dog with a bone over the course of the weeks. And because I didn't have anywhere to go, it just came to me in a flash of insight one day as I lay there on the couch. So I'm 19, lying on the couch, and this flash of insight came to me, and I must have been about 3 or 4 years old. And my dad is yelling at my mom. In fact, he's calling her names. And she shut herself behind her bedroom door. And I'm standing in the hallway with my little dukes up, yelling back at my dad that if you don't stop calling my mom names, I'm gonna sock your lights out, or words to that effect. And that's when I knew I had become this child warrior. That if I didn't have a real battle to wage, I figured my immune system would start attacking myself. So as I'm lying there at 19, thinking about this memory and the connection to the development of MS, I don't know that it changed my relationship with my father. I think what it did was it gave me a greater awareness that this environment that I grew up in, while there was love, there was a lot of toxic elements to the relationship that were unhealthy. What it caused me to do is reflect on how I had become hypervigilant how I had become always on, that I was stuck in this chronic fight flight.
それでとりあえずそれを受けた後、今度は医者の方から新しい提案があって、今度は放射線をすると。で放射線はハイエネルギーのベータ線だったんで、この病院にはそれだけの大きな施設がないから大きな病院に行ってほしいというので、その大きな病院でそれを30回受けました。その終わった時に私はもう死ぬ と同じような状態。そこで私が何をやったかと、ある夜臨死体験の夢を見た。でその夢があったことでもって私の感性がガラリ変わって嗅覚が急に鋭くなった。それで私は匂いのないところを探して屋上に行って屋上で寝てたんです。毛布をかぶって寝てたのは看護婦に見つかって、私がもうがんだと知っていよいよ屋上から飛び降り自殺をするんじゃないかということで、その日に私は退院が決まりました。右腎臓のがんで、それが肺の方に転移して、そして直腸にもありました。
I'm so grateful that the numbness retreated in the nick of time. I mean, like a few days before school started. I could feel my body again. My body was coming back online. So I was able to get through without any wheelchair, without any need for crutches or assistance, and just kind of a wing and a prayer. Like, maybe this is gone? I don't know. Being back in college was the beginning of a period of denial for me, because now that my body was feeling good again, well, I could go on doing what I had always done. And, having the stress of school life and whatever else students are thinking about, I just didn't really change my behavior or my life to address stress at that time. The one thing that I'll say is I didn't tell people about the experience. I was encouraged not to share the MS with anybody, that I would be perceived as weak. And later on in the workforce, I didn't tell anybody that I had MS because maybe I wouldn't get the promotion, maybe I wouldn't get the job opportunity. So that level of, I think you could call it shame, that I had this disease really added another layer of stress to my own life because I kept it hidden for so long. So it didn't retreat entirely because it would take a full 2 years for the numbness to retreat, but I was well enough to go back to school and off on my way of my sophomore year and the beginning of my 26-year journey of relapsing remitting MS.
So empowerment means taking an active role in your health, not just being passive. Until you empower yourself, how are you going to be willing to change your diet? How are you going to be willing to start exercising, right? It starts with that desire to make changes. What's interesting is that not all Radical Remission survivors start out empowered. Shin Terayama is a perfect example of someone who just said yes to everything his doctor said the whole way through. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. Unfortunately, in his case, those didn't work for him. And so he was eventually sent home on hospice care. And it was at that moment that he started empowering himself.
The research that we've done with exceptional responders, we've seen a commonality which has to do with empowerment and self-empowerment. And these individuals are sharing that they are taking an active role in their disease process and their overall health and well-being.
自宅へ戻った時、10日間ぐらい何も食べなかったんです。と言って家内に言ったら、家内は私のことをあなたの好きなようにして我々は応援するからっていうんで、私はこれは大変な努力だった。いろいろ炭でもって一晩水道水を置いても匂いが取れなかった。その時に私はミネラルウォーターのことを思い出して、ミネラルウォーターが3種類あったんで、それを持って子供に買いに行かせたら、そのうちの1種類だけ飲めた。
every couple of years, I would have a bad exacerbation, new symptoms, an onset of symptoms, tightness around my torso. I developed this symptom called Lermite sign, that every time you bend your head forward, you get this zap of electricity down your spine. I would have numbness and tingling in different parts of my body. No rhyme or reason to when symptoms came on, except I started noticing that when I was stressed, like conflict at home, or exams at school, or feeling overwhelmed in the workforce, I noticed almost immediately the advent of new symptoms or a worsening of existing symptoms. And conversely, when I felt relaxed, I felt a lessening of symptoms. So this became clear, and I thought, I had my dad telling me, honey, you can beat this thing. He was really motivational. And on the other ear, I had neurologists telling me there was nothing I could do. So I started to experiment. And over the course of those 26 years, I did a number of experiments, but there were 4 big ones. And one of the biggest was stress reduction, because I figured if chronic stress was in fact the reason for the MS in the first place, then I needed to learn how to relax. So that's what I started doing. I started practicing yoga in the late 80s, and that was maybe 5 years after I had been diagnosed. And I noticed that when I practiced and when I did the deep breathing and actually did the yoga and lay there in Shavasana, when I actually did the practice, I had fewer MS symptoms. It was really clear to me the cause and effect, that stress led to more symptoms, and that relaxation led to a lessening of symptoms. I did start taking control of my health outcomes, because I would ask questions of the neurologist, and I think it's super important to ask questions.
The relationship you have with your doctor is part of the medicine. And you don't have to be in love with your doctor, and they don't have to be in love with you, but there has to be a mutual respect, and you have to feel deep in your bones that they are on your side.
When somebody would say the only thing you can do is take medication, to say, well, what is the medication going to do for me? Is it actually going to cure this? Or please explain how it works. And when they couldn't, then I knew that they didn't have the answers. And that's when I started going inward and really thinking, well, if they don't have the answers, then I'm going to need to take control of this into my own hands. I have to say that my dad is really the hero of this story too, because from the earliest moments I can ever remember, he would encourage my can-do spirit. I think the first sentence I ever said was, I can do it. And my dad, would be very proud that, yes, you can do it, and encourage me. If my dad thought that I could beat this, then maybe I could.
Since a bunch of the things I've discovered have changed medicine, and since I'm the Dean for Clinical and Translational Research for a little place called Harvard, this may sound a little bit outlandish, but how patients respond emotionally and what they do, in my mind, makes all the difference. And there's a subgroup of patients, and not insignificant subgroup, who want to be given another route. And I'm not talking about alternative therapies. I'm talking about taking control of their life. They become exceptional. They sit with their disease untreated for 5, 10, 20 years. And they're not a few, they're a lot. And so people who actually decide that their own actions, and it can be diet, it can be exercise, it can be emotional, it can be deeply religious. And those people who reach inside and really take control, how do we measure that? When I'm a scientist, you can't measure the human spirit.
で退院が決まってから家へ行った時にまず第一番に医者は私に持たせてくれたのは鎮痛剤とそれからシバニルという経口抗がん剤だった。一切私は使わないで、私が何やったかと、まずその痛いと言った時にそこに手を当てて、その痛いのごめんなさい、そしてこれは自分が作ったもんだと思ったんでしょう。そこで初めて私は私のがんを愛してやった。痛みが消えたんです。鎮痛剤なくて痛みが消えたんです。
I don't remember the exact year, but it was back in Santa Monica. I went to the public library and we didn't have the internet. And the only book that I could find on MS was the Swank MS Diet book, I think it was called. And it purported that the best diet for MS was a low-fat vegetarian diet. And not only did I not notice any improvement of MS symptoms, I noticed a worsening of symptoms, not only of the MS itself, but of tummy trouble after eating. As long as I could remember, I had a little tummy trouble after eating. But I noticed when I started adding more grains to my diet, the tummy trouble got worse. The only thing that was really working from an experiment standpoint at this point was stress reduction. Even so, the MS symptoms persisted. They would ebb and flow over time, and through my 30s and into my 40s, this was the path.
朝起きた時に私が今ここで生きてるといった実感を持ったんで、その実感を日の出を見ることでもってもっと確かめたかった。これはすごいことが発見したんですけど、日の出の時にたくさんの渡り鳥が家のすぐ近くの50本ぐらいある欅の木にいて、いつも日の出の時に小鳥が鳴いてると。でそれが42分前に出るってことを何回も確かめた。そして私は毎日42分前に小鳥が鳴いたって言ってメモをして、そしてそれから日の出が出るまでの間にいろんな努力した。で一番の努力というのはまず自分が生きていることを宇宙に感謝した。そしてありがとうございます。そして大きな呼吸をして吸って、そうするとグラウンディングがとてもよくできています。で初めてそこでもって自分の吐く息に音を乗せてみた。そしたらどっかが振動するんです。で私はおーおーおーチャクラが7つあるというのはその後に少し本を読んで分かってたんですけど、チャクラが音でそれぞれ反応するっていうのはよく分かんなかった。でまず最初に胸のチャクラを見つけて、その次に一番上を見つけて、そしてそれぞれ一番響きやすい音を探したら、それぞれのチャクラに対して音程があるといったことに気がついた。でそれも日によって少しずつ変わってくるというのは、私は音に対して非常に敏感なんで、音楽を聴くのと同じようにこうチェックしてる。
We scientists call this field biofield science, and the biofield is just a term that we use to describe fields of energy and information that guide our health. Vital life energy is a term that's been described in pretty much every culture around the world. So things like qi, for example, in qigong, or ki in qigong, prana in the Indian context. There are so many different terms for this in many different cultures, and they all describe this understanding that we are energetic beings, and that by understanding and tapping into our vital energy through practices like qigong, meditation, yoga, other practices, we can foster our own healing and health.
チャクラを初めて胸のチャクラを見つけたときに素晴らしいと思ったんです。これは私にとっては大発見で、This is it's like yeah.
Show me.
Every day I practiced.
If you were able to see energy, and if you were to look at a person who had a lot of love in their life, there would be a lot of energy around them. Their energy would be strong, their energy would be big. And this energy I'm talking about is also your life force energy. And so the more of this life force energy that you have, the healthier you are, the stronger you are.
医学を超えてた。これはハンドパワーの力もあると思うんだ。で毎日のように私は痛みを取る方法っていうのは薬を使わないで痛みが取れるっていうことを
So I met my husband in the year 2000. I'll never forget telling my husband before he became my husband that I had this mysterious disease, and his attitude was, yeah, that no big deal. You know, we're in this together. So that was enormously supportive and loving, and now I had a partner to go through this with. In the mid-2000s, I was working for a company based in Boston. I was the VP of sales. I had a team all over the country. At this time, both of my parents were aging not very gracefully. It was probably the biggest stressful time I can remember was juggling all of those things in the mid-2000s and having the experience of more MS symptoms while all of that was happening. One of the things that I remember that was really pivotal during this time was flying back to a board meeting at Middlebury College in Vermont. I was on the board of the Alumni College. So I remember getting on that airplane home and pulling out a big sheet of paper. I drew a line down the middle, and on the left-hand side of the sheet of paper, I wrote all of the things that were stressing me out. And on the right sheet of paper, I wrote down what I was going to do about each one. And it was one of the most empowering exercises to actually put on paper all of the things that were causing this stress and all of the things that I was choosing to take action and to do about each one. By the time I landed on the plane and got home, I felt so much lighter because I had already decided what I was going to do with each one of those stressors.
So a cancer patient can't give themselves their own chemo. They can't arrange an operation for themselves in any meaningful way. Same with radiation. Somebody else has to help them gather those things and make a package that works for them. But what patients can do is they can eat properly. They can clean up their environment. Patients can work on their sleep.
These are things anyone can do. And for the most part, they are things you can do at home and at very low cost, if any cost at all.
一番の下の第一番のチャクラが動き出したら途端にそれが下からもうすごい勢いで上に上がってったんだ。そして部屋に2階の私の部屋に降りてった時に皆さん食事の用意をして皆さんの周りにオーラが見えた。オーラが見える、わあ、オーラが見える。私はこれは叫んでしまいました。今まで全然私が見えなかったと言って嘘をついてる。あれは何かイマジネーションだと思ってたのが本当に現実に存在するんだと。
So we just don't think about ourselves as bioenergetic beings, but we are. And in fact, our bodies emit what we call biophotons. What are biophotons? They're basically packets of light, and we can measure them in different ways. People can even measure biophotons as they're emitted by the finger, and people have been doing this for decades. And there are some frontier studies that have been done in Europe that suggest that the patterns of how our biophotons are emitted are related to our states of health.
When it comes to this healing factor of empowerment, what really amazes me with Radical Remission survivors is how they're always willing to make another change. That's the common thread. They're willing to change their life.
So by the mid-2000s, an especially persistent and stern neurologist at Stanford University insisted that the only way that I could stave off life in a wheelchair or having a shortened life was to go on a medication. And I will never forget being in his office, and I'm with my husband, Tom, and we're sitting there together, and we both looked at each other and we realized that this is something I haven't wanted to do forever, but this man, this neurologist who knows obviously more than I do, is really pushing me to do this, so we better do this. So that's when I decided to give it a go.
If you're going into your appointment in fight or flight because this feels like an enemy in some way, that you have to placate them or be worried about what they think about you or what you're doing or what you're thinking, I would urge people who have that to address it head on.
When we're talking about empowerment, we're not talking about people who flat out ignore their doctors. That's not what empowerment means. Empowerment means listening to your doctors, wanting to understand them, asking them questions, bringing in research, and really working collaboratively with your doctor so that you can feel like you're on a team with them.
For 4 years, I injected myself every night with this particular medication. Not only did I not notice any improvement of MS symptoms with this medication, but I noticed a worsening of symptoms that were unwanted. So that was my last foray with medication.
There are a lot of people who say, life happens to me. That means that they have no sense of control. So it's really very hard for them to do the kind of work that we're talking about. Then there are people who say, life happens with me. You know, yes, life happens, but I have some things that I can do. Then there are a few people who say, life happens through me, which means I can't control what will happen to me, but I can absolutely have a lot to say how I respond.
So I don't know what I have in me, but this persistence to just keep going is naturally there. So I kept going. And by October of 2010, I had learned enough about nutrition to know that the tummy trouble that I experienced after eating, there must be something that I'm eating that's causing this. So maybe I should go find out about it. So I made an appointment with a nutritionist because for as long as I can remember, we had some sort of grain with every dinner. I had my cereal for breakfast. I had peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch, day after day, endless. And she told me to take out the bad stuff and add in these nourishing gut supplements and powders and so forth. And within a week of removing the gluten, I stopped having tummy trouble after eating. I was cautiously optimistic, although I have to also say that I had the feeling of not being plugged into a wall anymore. As long as I had the MS, I felt it in my body, and I experienced it as energy running haywire through my body. So after I removed the gluten and healed my gut, I no longer had that feeling of electricity running haywire. And so I really felt in my bones that I no longer had this in my body.
フィンロンでもって国際会議があるというので、私はスピーカーとして招かれました。小さな子供たちが私のところに来て、シーン、モーニングハウ、アフタヌーンハウ、グッナイハウ、イーブニングハウ。そう、いつも私は50回ぐらい、日本人はこのハグをするという習慣がないんですよ。いつもボー。そしてあまりにもそれが素晴らしかったんで、日本へ帰ってきた時に、久しぶりに検査をしてみた。がんの影は完全になくなってた。
Within 1 month of removing the gluten, I stopped having any and all MS symptoms ever again. This was so exciting to me that I decided to make an appointment with that neurologist who had insisted that I take this medication because I wanted to share the happy news. Like, Doc, look, I took the gluten out. I don't have MS symptoms anymore. Guess what he said to me? Your MS must have been benign after all. There's no such thing as benign MS. Sure, there are different gradations of the experience that people have, but there really is no such thing as benign MS. It took me aback. And he said, furthermore, gluten sensitivity is a fad, Palmer. So that fad is going to pass. And furthermore, I'd like you to go back on the medication. So I left his office in February of 2011, dismissed, but not deterred. It was an attempt to disempower me, but that was when I dove into the research to really study how in the world is it possible that an average person like me could reverse a seemingly incurable disease like MS.
I think that we know that patients, unfortunately, when they have a bad disease or chronic disease, often end up knowing more than 99% of doctors about that disease.
治療を受けないっていうのは薬も飲まないでこれだけ元気になってます。病気になる前よりもっと頭がクリアになってます。そして頑張れます。ですからがんになって私は良かった。がんになって良かった。がんは治る病気です。自分でやれば治る病気です。本当に人間の体は治る力があるんだと。 そしてちゃんとそれを自分でコントロールすればいい。でその時に何が一番大きかったかというと、意識が変わっていったんです。いつも宇宙とつながるって、そして地球をはるかに超えた宇宙と連絡を取りながら自分の直感で自分の行動をしていった。
Every day I would spend hours on the internet researching in this vast biomedical database called PubMed. And I started looking up MS and autoimmune root causes and solutions. I really wanted to get to the bottom of how is this possible, and I started reading books and educating myself. By finding and removing my triggers, the chronic stress, and the steady stream of gluten that I was eating, and healing and sealing the lining of my gut, I had followed the autoimmune equation. And at this point in 2012, I really knew that I wanted to help people, that I wanted to give back, that I had uncovered some things that I felt could really help people.
With regard to exceptional responders, I know, and having talked now to many of them, that they all have this sense, because even though they had the exceptional response, they want to make sense of it. Having them contribute to the ability of other people to overcome the cancer adds meaning to this crazy thing that happened to them.
So that's when I decided to become certified as a functional medicine health coach myself and work with people to see if, in fact, if they followed these steps, would they heal? And that's what I did. After I had experience working with clients that were healing one person after another, I felt that this had to come out of me. It's not like I wanted to write a book needed to come out of me at this point. So my husband's been my biggest supporter throughout this entire process, both with the MS and afterwards, and through the process of writing a book and then putting it out into the world and now coming out and talking about this.
When I started studying Radical Remission survivors 15 years ago, almost nobody else was studying them. Since then, thankfully, a lot more people are beginning to study these incredible survivors that everyone was ignoring simply because they couldn't explain why these people got well. So I had a biotech company reach out to me after my book came out saying, we want to study the blood of Radical Remission survivors. We want to look at their antibodies. In addition, I had researchers from Harvard University reach out to me saying that they wanted to research these 10 factors in more depth.
So to my knowledge, there has not been any clinical trial that looked at all 10 of the radical remission factors as a whole package, as a holistic multimodal intervention. The hope is that the data from this pilot study will inspire more clinical researchers and scientists to conduct larger and more definitive studies regarding this phenomenon of radical remission and how to achieve it.
ION stands for the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and the Spontaneous Remission Bibliography is a project that IONS has been working on for just about 20 years. It's the world's only comprehensive database of medically vetted spontaneous remission cases in the peer-reviewed medical literature. We would love one day for the established medical community or for researchers in oncology to be able to take a look at some of the cases in our database and be able to see, here's 70 cases of this kind of cancer, and all of these patients have these similarities in common. To be able to one day be able to test some new forms of treatment, creative forms of treatment for cancer.
The NCI's Exceptional Responders Initiative is a program that looks at patients that have had cancer and that have had unexpected responses from their therapies. We need to start learning from these kind of situations. If you can understand that, and then maybe you can reproduce that.
So NEAR is the Network for Enigmatic Exceptional Responders. The NEAR study is a study that covers a lot of different cancers, and it asks the question, why across all these cancers, even in trials that did not work for most people, did individuals have this remarkable result? I started asking myself, whenever I saw something unusual, not how to explain it away, but to ask, isn't this an opportunity to actually push medicine forward?
So the things that I did to recover from the MS are things that I still do today. It's super important to understand that we're not one and done. We don't just do things until we heal and then go back to our lifestyle, because it's the lifestyle that got us into this predicament in the first place. It's not about blame or shame. It's just about educating yourself and empowering yourself and finding those things and trying them and to see what works for you. So for me, I start my day every morning with gratitude and meditation. I exercise almost daily. We live near the hills, so I'm very thankful that I hike most days, or I still do yoga. I have wonderful supportive community of friends and loved ones, so life is better than ever.
私は今83歳ともうちょっとで84歳になります。そして病院を出てから35年、私は7人の孫がいます。私の体が良くなり始めた時に6ヶ月ぐらい経ってたんですけど、私の友人がチェロを弾いてみませんかって言って呼んでくれたんです。でその時にチェロをこう弾いてみたら、わあなんて素晴らしいんだろうと思ったんです。
I think it's really important to remember that even if we can't explain why someone got well, or if perhaps the ways in which they got well challenge our current way of thinking, we can't ignore them. We have to look at them, investigate them, analyze them, test them, until we figure out what's going on. Because just ignoring them leads us nowhere. We don't learn anything new if we ignore someone.
So in 2018, 7 years after I had been dismissed by the neurologist, I walked back into his office because I was really eager to learn how his thinking might have evolved. And when I walked into his office, the first thing he said, with his tail kind of between his legs, was, "Palmer, we now know that gluten sensitivity is real." And he agreed that it was a good time for me to get a follow-up MRI. So that's what I did. I went off and got a follow-up MRI the next day, literally came back. No new lesions. This lesion, this big lesion, has disappeared, and lesions that you have in other areas have faded. He said, "Palmer, this couldn't be a better story. In the world of neurology, this is as good as it gets."
現在もですね、チェロは演奏されていますか？
毎日やってます。チェロが私の脇にある限りは、そんなにバイブレーション、ビブラートなんかかけられなかったんですけど、毎日ただ弾いてました。そしてチェロがない時には私は声でもって自分の体を振動させます。今朝も日の出で私は大きな声を出してやりました。だから私はこのチェロの音は薬だと、そして副作用はないです。